Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar on the Global Payments Survey results. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we evaluate the survey results and discuss the current payments landscape and your peers' actions and plans. Our speakers for today are Johnny Moreland, Vice President of Sales Americas at TIS, and Craig Jeffery, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Johnny and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian, and welcome everyone. So glad you could join us in today's webinar, and I'm glad to be here with Johnny. We are in Atlanta in the same location in the studio, so it's hopefully a different experience for you as you look at webinars. So welcome, Johnny.
Yeah, thanks for having me down.
I know it was a long drive in traffic, but next time we'll figure a time of day that gets you here smoothly.
Yeah.
We have a lot to cover, and we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to listen to some of the results from this. For those who took the survey, thank you for doing that. We know it's an investment of your time. It's much appreciated. I think it helps you and your organization. It also helps the industry at large. And today we get to go over those topics and some of the learnings from them. There's a full report. We'll share more of that information later. And so I'll begin by going through our agenda. What are we covering today? We'll give you some information about the survey. This is the third year we've run the survey. There was 55 questions. We'll go into some of the details about that. We'll look at managing payments. What are some of the top pain points? Some of those are security, multiple systems, managing data, and we'll cover a few of the other areas where you and your peers have identified the top pain points. On the sanction side, we see ongoing improvements. You and your peers are doing a better job of sanctioning, running your sanction screening to filter out sanctioned parties and having less reportable events. This is good progress. We're not done by any stretch, but this is an area where we've seen ongoing progress. And what it's driving some of the payment initiatives is the flip side of some of the top pain points, but some additional aspects of what drives some of the payment initiatives we'll cover about fraud, efficiency, and liquidity management are some of the top drivers of organizations to undertake payment initiatives to move things forward. You can also think about new payment rails. You can think about all the challenges of moving faster, moving to more enriched payment schemes, and this matters. On the spending plans, there's a net increase expected on spending plans. We see that's continued for years. We expect that to continue for probably 8 to 10 years into the future, not from the survey, but from where we see companies adapting and growing. And then finally, Johnny and I will cover 4 key takeaways from the research to leave those learnings with you. I'm going to do the quick survey stats, and we'll get Johnny in here on comments shortly as well. So we had over 230 respondents, which is excellent. Coverage, very heavy North America, heavy in Europe and Asia Pacific, lower level participation for organization of operations in Latin America, Middle East, and then the least represented area was Africa, with just about 1 in 5 presenting operations in that region. Third year, we ran the survey for a 1-month period, a couple days longer than that, and there was 55 questions. I don't think anybody had to answer 55 questions, but based on how you answer, that's where it goes. And so this provides a full and rich set of information for people. So let's get into the payment management challenges. Johnny, as you look at this, what are you seeing here, and how does this matter to any corporate or any banker who's listening?
Well, it wasn't surprising to see the results of this one. I think security and fraud is top of mind for any of our finance functions at a company. What was interesting as I looked at this and then compared to some of the other questions and answers that we'll get to later are some of the challenges from an FX and cross-border capability. One of the things the survey shows later is the growth in that area, but I expected to kind of see that a little higher in the challenges. But security, fraud management, using multiple ERP systems and CRMs and AP, AR systems, and that the integration, those are always two of the top items that pop up in surveys like this. But I think some of the trends that we'll see a little bit later will speak to some of the changing metrics that we're seeing and the priorities from this perspective.
Yeah, I guess too, one thing on this, we look at, the multiple systems. Why is that a challenge? Well, when there's changes in payment rails, and there's been a lot more changes, new opportunities for faster payments, but also for better payments with more enriched information. And now when you have to make a change, maybe you're moving to ISO 20022, the XML format. Now if you have 6 systems creating payments, you have to make changes to 6 systems if you're doing them in the core system. And so that's the level of pain is certainly high. Some really good points there. On the IT resources side, I guess this is perennial. IT resources and management priorities are always a difficulty because there's so many competing demands. I don't know if any other thoughts on some of the items that are on the lower side, still above 1 and 5.
Yeah, I agree with you on the IT resources. It's in some of the conversations that we have with some of our clients, they're often competing with the broader challenges from the business perspective. So the treasury focus and the treasury tools typically take a backseat to say something from within that business's CRM or billing system that's driving the main business. So there's constant battle for that internal versus external projects on the IT side. The other component that I think was a surprise for me was the second to last in managing rebates from payment methods. Particularly in the U.S., there's been a pretty steady focus and increase from a virtual card or monetization concept within the U.S. I know that the survey was sent more broadly to clients throughout the globe, but I think if we looked at this from a regional perspective, that might be a little bit higher in the Americas because there is a keen focus and has been for the last several years on monetizing payments and creating a rebate opportunity from those payments.
Yeah, that's really good. On the global financial messaging channels and formats, that's an area that bankers seem to know those terms really well. Not every corporate does. So global financial messaging channels might be, an example would be SWIFT, and formats. The movement of all the payment infrastructure systems, or many of them, to ISO 20022, the XML format, is changing the plumbing behind the scenes, and it's also starting to make a bigger impact on the endpoints, which are the corporations. So sometimes as a corporation, we send stuff and we push stuff off. We don't necessarily understand everything that goes behind the scenes, but that re-plumbing is making a big difference. I think that's going to increase quite a bit over the next couple of years as people see that.
Yeah, the only comment that I'll make there is the advance outside of Americas. They have been on the RTP rails and using the ISO 20022 message set for quite some time. So they've already kind of felt that pain. I think it's coming from an Americas perspective. The push for RTP and the rails that are going to be moving those payments faster. I think we're there. It's been an ongoing kind of debate of looking at how we move that into the ecosystem with everything else that's happening. It's been around now for 6 or 7 years. We have a very good template of looking at how things are done in Europe from a faster payments initiatives, and I think that the focus on that over the next 2 years is going to increase. We saw it with COVID and the advent of some of the challenges that we had to be able to process payments then. I think that we'll continue to see that evolution and really pick up in the Americas.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And so we are at our first poll question. So pay attention for those who are answering. If you're looking for credits for your CPA designation, you do need to answer those. This is great for everyone to answer. It's a single choice. What is your organization's biggest challenge when it comes to cross-border payments? So we have other, unsure. If you don't have cross-border payments, you can list unsure if you'd like. But go ahead and answer that and submit it. And while you're doing that, please notice in the chat box, you can follow on LinkedIn, you can follow TIS and Strategic Treasurer. We invite you to do that. We encourage you to do that. We would beg you to do that. Our marketing team would love it if you do that. Our marketing teams. And then, yes, people can see if you type in TIS. If we get, we'll just say if we get 100 people typing the word TIS in the chat box, we'll send all the poll results out with the presentation deck. So we'll just do that. That'll also give Brian the opportunity to count, so you can count to 100. That would be excellent. So we're ready for the results. Johnny, I'm going to ask any comments, and you'll just do a quick summary. So managing FX risk, number one challenge, 23%. The number two in terms of a challenge is compliance and regulatory requirements. Then it dips down to lack of transparency, high transaction costs. High transaction costs edges that out. Slow settlement times is the least impactful. Any thoughts on, just your initial impressions on
Sure.
this?
It doesn't surprise me. FX risk and the changing world markets as quick as things change, and managing that exposure is a critical component in cross-border payments. Compliance and regulatory requirements, depending on the countries, right? Depending on how many countries that you're moving money in and out of, covering those and being able to have a flexible enough system to be able to cover each country's risk and regulatory requirements is crucial as well. It doesn't surprise me that slow settlement times are low. That from a cross-border payment, there's an expectation of timing, and I mean in most cases you're still within 2 or 3 days of a settlement process. Even if you're using some of the slowest rails now, it's not like it has been in the past. But yeah, the results don't surprise me at all. The FX risk is the biggest one and biggest challenge in pulling that into the global and cross-border payments ecosystem.
One thing I liked on this was the lack of transparency in the payment process. That was 12%. About 1 in 8 had identified that. I would have thought that would have been higher. And the reason I think this is going to increase an expectation is better transparency is we see that in our personal lives. You get rideshare, you see where the vehicle is, where it's coming, how much it's going to cost. All of those things happen. And in so many, especially cross-border payments, it disappears into a black hole for a period of time. And did it come out? We'll send some research on it. And now as we see some of those having better transparency, it's also creating better processes, because if there is a bank or an intermediary who's slowing things up, it becomes apparent to everybody. And so I think this is making for better payments. Transparency in the process, transparency in costs, all those things are, I think, helping to make payments better. Thanks, everybody, for taking the poll question, responding to that. We will continue on. So as we look at this integration status, we say consistent progress, looking at the data. And so this is the survey was taken in 2019, 2022, and 2023. So we've got some time frame. Sometimes we see almost no change over multiple years. Here's where we are seeing some changes. What's changing, and why should people care about what their organization's doing to adapt to the change that their peers might be doing?
I love this slide. It really indicates for me and the companies that I've worked with from a financial technology perspective, the progress that we're making in the markets. So as systems are getting more complex, as companies are acquiring other companies and increasing the complexity of their ecosystem, the need for this integration, the need for these systems and solutions to talk to one another is increasing. And that's where companies like TIS and my peers come into play from a financial technology perspective. Partnering with the banks, partnering with the ERP systems, and being able to put together a solution that can talk to one another. is important in managing cash and managing the liquidity of a business. So I really like the slide. I like the progression that we see just in the short last 2 years of the survey results.
Yeah, so if you look at anybody reading the top two, you can say integrates directly with all of our banking platforms. It went from 9 to 16 and integrates directly with some of our banking platforms. If you add those two up in 2024, you say it's 71%. And you go back just a couple of years and it's 47%. That's extremely notable. 24% of the entire population has now moved into the section within a 2-year period. This is what we've been talking about for many, many years. There's been progress, and now we see it realized in a pretty significant way. People want to be able to act on the data in the systems that they're using, like ERP systems or treasury platforms or visibility tools. They want to be able to do that, and they're definitely achieving that. Excellent. So we'll continue on. On the bad side, we used a nice red color to show sanctioned party payments. It's been declining. It's a slow glide path, hopefully down to zero. Any thoughts or comments about companies that may not be taking payments to sanctioned parties seriously, or maybe who are?
Yeah, the one comment that I'll make here is this has been a focus over the last several years for companies. It just takes one event. It just takes one missed payment that really then causes challenges and significant amount of resources, both from a personnel perspective as well as monetary fines or country obligation fines or things that come in that really can make a difference in the business. So the focus on this, it's a keen item that they need to be really laser focused on. The drop to 5% is very impressive. There's going to be a ratchet, I think, over the next couple of years with AI that's coming along that could see some bumps of these based off of what we've seen in previous questions and the complexity of the fraud that's coming in that will be enhanced by AI. I think it's something that we need to be keeping an eye on as well.
All right. So how are we achieving this? How are you and your peers achieving this decline? We believe it's related to some of the screening practices. Some of these bounce around, some of these move. And so the idea of capturing information over a long period of time may show no trend change. Like some of these are pretty flat. Sometimes they bounce around slightly. Any thoughts on the OFAC screening? OFAC is one method of screening. That's one list. There's certainly other lists.
I think the reliance on the banks, as well as some internal processes being the first two items, I would say from a bank perspective, if you're doing business in multiple countries, and which bank are you expecting to catch that risk? So is it between the banks within each of the countries? What systems are you processing those payments out of? One of the areas that, in talking to some companies that are more globally based, they'll have operating accounts in the countries that they're processing and doing business with. Do each one of those operations have the same protections as you do in the main business? And that becomes a challenge when you think about how those systems are or are not communicating with each other. So as you look at the answers to these, I guess it begs further questions of which bank relationship are you relying on, and is that the same and consistent across your entire business? And I think those are the areas that people need to be looking at.
Yeah. So one of the things is, as a data analyst and as a researcher, that we noticed, you can see some of the numbers moving around, relying primarily on the banks, 37, 31, 38. Some of that's reflective of who took a survey in a particular year. The two things that appear to show decent trends is there is a growth of the second one, have a dedicated internal process for screening or payment activity. That's consistent, 2% a year. Any 1 year is not going to make a big difference, but that seems like it's moving in the right way. The biggest thing on here is that the do not screen, and we see this as a compliance-related issue, is like we're serious about it, has gone from 9% to 3%. So those have moved off. There's still, 1 in 10, 1 in 9 that don't screen but aren't really concerned about it, and maybe we're paying primarily within an individual country.
Yeah, I think you'll find that category is they're maybe singular focused on a particular country, so they have a good grasp on who they can and can't pay. Maybe they're making payments to bank owned accounts holistically, and those accounts are even further sanctioned or screened from the banks that they're partnered with. But the drop from 9% to 3%, it is an issue, needs to be on everybody's radar. I think one of the other components has stayed consistent, and it'd be interesting to see how the language is on the survey. But I think even having the internal processes, a lot of times are going to be enhanced by some third-party solution. They have to have a connection to an OFAC list, or they have to have updated data. So maybe it's just the data components that they're feeding into that. But it is important in this process to be able to have inputs from multiple angles.
Great points. I think the other thing is, what should you be doing? This is what your peers are doing. There's slow progress. There's some progress, and that's helpful. So what should you be doing? You should be looking for an integrated process that does and checks the sanction screening. There's other compliance issues, other validation services that make sense. These are key things that help protect your organization. So when you think about what's leading, moving towards that makes a lot of sense. Surveys don't tell you what you should do. They're telling you what people are doing, where they're going. And so we'll go from there. And with that, we will bring up our number 2 poll question. This will pop up on the screen. This is about investments in payment technology. And the question is a single choice, so pick one. How is your organization approaching investments in payments technology over the next 12 months? You're increasing significantly your spend, make some modest investments, maintaining current levels, reducing our payments technology budget. That may be because you spent a lot in the prior year. We have no immediate plans to invest, and then unsure, unknown or unsure. And we just need 18 more TIS typed into the webinar chat. And we appreciate TIS underwriting this research and participating in today's presentation. So very much appreciated. Give everybody a few moments on there, and then as soon as that's completed, we'll ask for another link or so to appear in the chat box. All right, now they're up. So just summarizing a couple of those. The top 2 are really close, just a few points away, 1 percentage point, but less than 5 people differences. We plan to make some modest investments. We're maintaining our current levels of investment. Those are about the same, but those who are making, increasing, it looks like we're at about 40%, increasing significantly, and plan to make some modest investments, totaling about 39%. And I look at that, and I'm wondering what you're thinking about that. Is that the bias of people who are coming to a webinar on payments because they're in the mix, or do you think that might be reflective of the overall population? I know that's speculation.
Yeah, it is a little bit, but in talking to the prospects and customers that we're talking about or talking to, it does match up. So the question really is around where. And most of those conversations are around the integration components, allowing the various tools that they're using to be able to leverage the same data lakes, leverage the same connections to the banks, the bank files, systems, to create better forecasting, to create better payment processes, and be able to kind of harmonize that across the business is important. So the question really is where. I think, again, there's probably some regionality to the answers, right? So as we think about the Americas and the challenges that are faced for companies that are here in America doing cross-border payments, I think cross-border in and of itself is becoming a bigger challenge, as we'll see in a little bit later. I keep alluding to it. I guess we'll kind of kind of spoiling a little bit on that front, but managing the risk, managing the exchange rates, managing the integration, all of those things require investments. The systems as they stand today typically are just not going to come right out of the gate and be able to support those changes.
Yeah, and a company's complexity profile. Are you in one system that's making payments? 3, 4, 5? Are you adding things regularly? How many countries are you in? How many banks are you dealing with? All of those are complexifying factors.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for taking the survey. Thanks for typing TIS in the chat box. We're well over our 100. Thank you so much for doing that. So now we move into drivers and payment initiatives. And I had mentioned fraud protection, efficiency, and liquidity management. You can see as you read down, working capital and even costs show up here. And then finally, vendor and supplier management in 2024 hit 7%. One of the quick things maybe I could ask you to comment on, Johnny, is that fraud and protection management has had significant gyrations. If we go back 5 years, it dropped from 63 to 35. Thoughts on that? And you can see some changes in efficiency and liquidity management. What might be happening here?
Well, one, I think we're doing a much better job of including fraud protection in tools that drive efficiency and liquidity management. So I think that you'll see the shift. Maybe it's not necessarily a specific driver from a fraud protection perspective, but some of the tools that have created efficiencies allowed for better visibility in liquidity management, working capital. Those are including financial fraud and payment protection modules within them. So that shift is adjusting there. I think that fraud will always lead the pack. From a roadmap perspective for us, it's front and top of mind as we think about tools and things to enhance our systems. But what we're looking at is how we build efficiencies and visibility alongside of increasing fraud protection. I think they go hand in hand. So I think that's where you're seeing the shift from 63 down to 35 and it leveling out and kind of normalizing a bit more on some of the other categories down below.
Yeah, so for those who are familiar with our surveys, this question is one of the ones that rank things. It's a forced ranking question, and this is picking the most important one. Which one showed up the most important? And so fraud, clearly number one by a 7-fold factor over number 2 in 2019 is now 2x number 2. So if you look at efficiency, 17%. So we have information on, if you pick the top 2 or the top 3 and see where those lay out. So we see some of the movement there, but I wanted to make sure you know that. We ask questions in different ways, which shows some different nuances, level of severity, like what's number 1, what are the top 3, and some of those factors. The other thing to notice too is we think back on the years, COVID-19 happening 20, really impacting 2020, 2021, and into 2022 when this took place, liquidity management had moved up in importance then as well. That became more important during that particular period. And so you can see a little pullback there, not quite facing the stress of slow payments and disruption in the global economy. So a number of factors as we look at those years, dates, and what's occurred. All right, we're going to move on to changes in tech and innovation. And we like to keep surveys consistently so we can do fair year-over-year comparisons. You can't say that this is a fair representation because we added one, right? So sophistication of fraud is a new one. We're showing them side by side so you can see those. So we've added one, which can dilute everything else. But we've added that because the sophistication of fraud schemes has really risen rapidly. If you can make some comments about any of the key categories that you'd like to highlight for our group.
Yeah, I think the bottom 2 that are on the list, not bottom 2 as far as ranking goes, but the trends. When I look at these surveys, to your point of having consistent questions over the course of that time, seeing the increased complexity from 2019 to 2024 jump 14 points is a huge jump. Almost close to doubling, from what it was in 2019. And then The adjustment from on the last one about technology being outdated and needs of upgrades, I think there was a lot of investment in COVID where everybody brought their systems current, so that pulled that number back to the 9%. But then now, as we're seeing the advent of AI and some other technologies that are coming through, cloud particularly, we're seeing that conversation spark back up and in a pretty big way, reflecting from the 32%. Look, it doesn't surprise me. Fraud in the top two categories are still fraud. It is a concern. Again, it doesn't take but one event. There's been a number of those type of events in the news lately that have really big implications to the business from a monetary perspective, as well as an impact to the business.
Yeah, just another factor there is you see if something is increased into 2024, now there's a new item entered in there. So despite the fact that there's more, you can see the emphasis as one of the top three items in many of these cases, right? The escalating complexity of the payments environment, new payment rails, ongoing globalization for many companies. How do we solve that? How do we move ahead? That's where different providers, embedded banking, services of payment hubs and treasury aggregators like TIS are helping to solve the complexity by reducing, instead of having to make changes in 8 places, you make those changes in one place. You isolate that activity. All right, that brings us to our third and final poll question. The bell should be ringing for that one. Is which of the following payment trends is most important to your organization over the next year? Adoption of faster payment solutions, enhancing payment security and fraud prevention, expanding cross-border payment capabilities, integration of payment solutions with ERP systems, improving visibility and control over cash flow and liquidity, other, or unsure. And we have enough responses in the chat box, so that's excellent. Just do one more reminder of, following our companies on LinkedIn. This is really helpful. Allows us to stay connected. So thanks for joining this webinar, and thanks for following the companies on LinkedIn. All right, we have. We'll give everybody just a few moments on this. And again, everybody who took the survey, thank you so much for taking the time. That's so important for us to be able to see what's happening in large numbers across the landscape. All right, as soon as it's ready, we will take a look. I think people are answering, and there it is. Excellent. Thank you for responding. Fraud prevention, number one, again, at a significant level. So we're picking number one. The top most important is enhancing payment security and fraud. I want to ask you about that. Number two is integration of payment solutions with ERP is number two. So maybe any comments between integration of payment solutions and improving visibility and control over cash flow and liquidity. I always hate making a pick your best one. Those two seem both very important.
In order to do the second one, you have to have the first one, right? So in order to improve visibility, you have to have that integration from the ERP perspective. You also have to have the integration from your bank statements and the accounts as well across your entire business. So both of those really go hand in hand. If you want to do the latter, you have to have the former. One of the other comments that I would make as far as the enhancements in this particular area is giving kudos to the banking industry with the open API access that we are starting to see, particularly in Europe and in other regions. It's coming to the Americas. We're seeing that really being pushed through from a banking perspective, and being able to get access to the data that sits on the accounts, the transactions, that we can pull that stuff in a much easier way than we have been in the past. Obviously, we've always had BAI2 formats and statement dumps and things like that, but giving us the access, giving technology partners the access to that data is critical to be able to help corporates be able to manage their visibility and cash flow forecasting.
The adoption of faster payment solutions, I'll say something that's opinionated, maybe not too opinionated, but at least our view. Maybe you could agree, disagree, or put some additional nuance with that. I'm not too surprised to see that only 1 out of 11 identified the adoption of faster payment solutions. Here's why I think that. There are use cases for faster. Speed matters in a number of use cases, and they're very important. We've seen in multiple surveys how the focus on faster payment solutions or immediate payment solutions has declined somewhat. And since that's the case, it seems logical that it's not all about speed. It might be about information, might be about security. It might be about all of those things, a more comprehensive, a better payment solution, of which speed is one factor. And so to me, I see that as that might be a reason why that's lower and less. Any additional color from you?
It's heavily weighed on the use case. So if a business is working with a consumer, and the consumer is their customer, it's important to make sure that transaction is settled and you've secured the funds quickly, right? So being able to have an ecosystem that supports credit and debit card transactions that then are settled between the banking systems overnight, but they're still secured funds, and we are operating in a fashion where I'm going to walk away with my goods. I need to make sure that money is secured by the partner that's providing that, right? In a B2B world, it's been a debate. It has been a debate, and for quite some time, right? As far as the use case applicability and it working. There are still a number of businesses that kind of manage to a float, or have that component within their cash and liquidity processes, overnight funds and things like that, right? So there's a huge debate, always has been, about the applicability of RTP and real-time money movement within the B2B space and corporate, particularly for the Americas. There's a difference of what I'll say is just the kind of banking regulation and view in Europe outside of the Americas, right? So we have the virtual card monetization concept that's really been driver. That's also real-time payments. It's just using a different modality, right? It's using credit and the credit rails, even though the settlement is overnight for the user, for whether it's the vendor or the receiver that's receiving the payment, or the payer. It's still in real time. They still see that transaction happen in real time. So it doesn't surprise me. I think that we will see a push, again, like I mentioned earlier, the last couple of years, that has been a focus on pushing for additional use cases where faster payments make sense. But we have to make sure that it's not faster fraud, right? So that term of faster payments equals faster fraud, we've got to make sure that the fraud tools are in place to be able to identify those transactions before they happen or as they're happening, to make sure that we don't have an issue of fraud that comes from those payment types.
Excellent. Well, thanks. We will we'll continue the discussion, and thanks everybody for responding to those poll questions. We definitely appreciate it. This is a significant issue, notable growth in volume of global payments. This ongoing complexity is you're doing more global payments, whether it's all in euros and maybe one currency, or maybe with one bank, or maybe lots of banks, multiple payments. We're seeing global payment volumes increasing. If you look at the net level between increasing minus decreasing, that's 29%. So essentially 3 out of 10 companies are experiencing a net increase in global payments, 57%, about the same. That's significant complexity. Any comments on that from a survey perspective or from an implication perspective?
Yeah, I alluded to this. This is the one that I was alluding to earlier. But as globalization continues to increase, I think this is just going to continue to trend in this direction. As a company looks to expand footprints, as they acquire new businesses that are outside of the U.S., this is going to continue to be a challenge. challenge or an opportunity where we'll see this increased trade practices, right, between countries, and opportunities to be able to, whether they outsource manufacturing or supplies or whatever the case may be. The world is getting smaller, right? Like the ability to do business outside of your particular country footprint is increasing, and I think that this is going to continue to be a trend that we'll see in the future.
Yeah, so many key things there happening on the growth of complexity, growth of volumes. I mean, not all volume is the same in terms of complexity, right? If you're doing 100,
Agreed.
you go to 150, that's increasing. Maybe it's the same bank, same electronic method, very easy, but oftentimes it's in more countries and more currencies, maybe with more systems. Those various factors together increase that complexity level. What's happening on the international payment side? The subtitle is Cross-Border Relations. The question is, what percentage of your payments are delivered internationally outside of your headquarters country? So the blue is on the left side, that's none. 1 to 20% is the green. And if we look at where is it the most, if we look at the red, yellow, and purple coming in from the right side, we can see how this has shifted over time. 2019, the audience had 22% of companies were the 41%, all the way up to 100% being delivered internationally. So a little bit more of a global feel for that audience. In 2024, we see 13% having this global delivery of payments. 41 to 60% were 12%, 1% 61% to 80%. None of them identifying the vast majority of their payments. What should companies look at? I mean, people can see the numbers. That's reflective of what's going on. None is smaller. What should companies think about in terms of strategies to? I know we didn't set it up this way, but what strategies should people look at?
Sure.
Whether you're growing in complexity or maybe staying the same with a certain level of complexity. Because once you're above 20%, you've got a significant amount of complexity.
Sure. Now, I think as we talk about tools and we talk about integration, right? I think managing FX risk is a key factor. So whatever internal process you have, obviously we talked about fraud ad nauseum. We don't need to continue on that. That's going to be a part of that. But the operational process around processing cross-border payments is important. And it's important to have a partner that will help manage those. So whether that's your bank partner, I've seen some situations where companies will move money between bank accounts within their own ecosystem to make payments out of that operating account from that country within the country. So depending on how you set things up, will determine those tools. But I think FX risk, fraud compliance, and country compliance is important to factor in as well.
Yeah, very good point, Johnny. I'm also observing some chat in the chat box. I didn't realize that we can make another plea for selling merchandise using product positioning on our webinars. We have to take advantage of that. So thanks for your comments, Amy. That's hilarious and well done. So we do read what's in the chat box, of course. So spending on payment services, I mean, we see and expect to continue to see growth in ongoing high levels of spend in payment services for at least 8 to 10 years due to changes in payment rails, changes in requirements for compliance, the move to ISO 20022. We think that's going to have a really long run, and that's good for companies like yours who help other companies, for fintechs like yours who help other companies do that. Besides that general pitch of, it's good for your business.
Sure.
Here's where we see, as you look at the chart, our spending plans for payment services and technology in the next year are higher, significantly higher, or about the same, or lower. So as you look at these, any additional any thoughts on where we're seeing this trend? Right, there's a bigger spike in 2022. We're kind of back towards just an elevated level, I would say.
Yeah, I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that coming out of identifying some of the really glaring pain points that companies had in managing their back office operations, whether that was the financial component or just their main business. So I think that elevated spend is coming from that. What will be interesting as AI becomes more prevalent in all of our tools and all of our lives is how does it have an impact on this particular segment, right? So there's a lot of conversations around tools that provide for better forecasting or have the ability to predict. I hesitate to use the word because it's very challenging to put all factors in, both the micro and macro factors that would influence the market. But how do we view those tools within our daily lives and to be able to normalize and make things more efficient in the way that we're operating? And I think that there will be a number of tools that come out to really change the game from that perspective.
Yeah, excellent. And just a comment on the bottom of the chart. Not every answer is included in here. There's some that's I don't know, it's not applicable. There's some other options. So we strip those out to reduce the noise. I know people look at 100% and say these lines don't match up, but that's why we pull that out for simple viewing excellence, if that's a word or a phrase that matters. So what are some of the final thoughts? This is sometimes we roll through our final thoughts very quickly. This is where we're going to talk through some of these in some length. And Johnny, why don't you start us off with,
Sure.
I think we decided ahead of time, you're doing slide pillar 1 and 3. I'll do pillar 2 and 4.
Absolutely.
And we'll go there.
Well, I think that as we've talked about, it's not surprising to me that security and fraud showed up first on all the slides that we looked at. I think quickly followed by that was the system complexity, and how do we tie those systems together to be able to create efficiencies and create visibility across the entire ecosystem. That then begs the issue of IT resources and having to fight for those IT resources against internal and external factors. And then ultimately, the tools are only as good as the data. So from a top priority perspective, I think these are very well aligned. If you were to ask any office of the CFO what their focus are, it would be some combination in order of these four. So it wasn't surprising to see that coming from the survey results.
I think, as you're a listener thinking about your particular organization, or if you're a banker thinking about your various clients, what are those priorities? On security, system complexity. You may be dealing with, almost everything's in one or two systems, and they may not be what is as challenging as security might be. The threat of fraud creates reputational risk and financial loss. The other is, the challenge of IT resources. So almost every single project has an IT component,
Right.
And you're either doing that internally, or you're leveraging a fintech and your bank to do certain functions. And so, how do you solve for that? The restriction and the gating of those resources. You have your bank do it, you have a fintech do it, or you spend a lot on internal IT resources. The shift has clearly been to use fintechs and banks to solve those problems because they just have much more scale than almost any individual company. The value of data, what's more valuable, money or data? Well, data gets you money. I mean, the idea that the more data we have that's more enriched, that helps with regular business processes, it's more efficient. It helps us with forecasting. Better data can have a better trading process from the payable to the receivable side, which means your working capital and your cash flow is going to be more consistent. So, yeah.
The only thing I'd add to that is that it's not just the data, it's the index and the use of the data, right? So any company or any prospect that you talk to has an enormous amount of data at their hands, but what do they do with it? How do they create an ecosystem that allows them to maximize the value of the data? And I think that's the conversation that's most intriguing for business leaders, is to understand what data do they have, how can they index it, and then how can they put that data to work for them? Whether it's evaluating trends, it's identifying future valleys or peaks that they then have the opportunity to sweep those funds and use those funds in a different way. Those are the things that I think really are the most exciting to talk about when we're talking about managing cash.
Excellent, thanks. So the rise and spend is our second pillar, which flows from a lot of the top priorities. These are important. They impact the organization's financial health, well-being, liquidity planning. So investing in payments is driven by multiple factors. Those factors that were just identified. But this, the idea and the fact that there's new payment rails, there's expectations about embedded banking, embedded payments, embedded treasury in our treasury management systems, in our ERPs, in our admin systems. All of those have to be solved. And most companies, once you get beyond a certain size, you run into a lot of those complicating factors. So solving for those matters. The new payment rails are really interesting because it's been very static for a long time. It's like, oh, we've got a new standard entry class for ACH in the US. Like, that was a long time. And then it's like, okay, we got same day ACH, RTP, FedNow. That's just in the US. You go to Canada, you go to each country, there's newer payment rails. And it's not just that they're new payment rails. They tend to be faster. They can carry a lot more information. They're in better, richer formats, greater visibility. And so the rise in spend takes advantage of those if there's a particular use case for speed, or if there's this general trend of we need to do better across the board, we need to be more scalable. Because everything's heading in the direction of faster, better, more information, greater visibility. And so that investment in infrastructure and tools has to take place over the next 8 years. And we see more companies moving and doing that. And so that rise in spend is happening, maybe not as fast as I would have thought would take place. Pandemic accelerated, probably 3 years worth of spend in 1 year. But we expect this to continue for eight to 10 years. And, the criminals on the fraud side are forcing everyone to continue to look at it more seriously. And I'll just give you an example of that. You've probably seen this all the time. It's if we go back 5 or 6 years ago, insurance companies were talking about, validation, account validation. They were all talking about that. And almost every other company was like, we don't need that. We don't need that. And it seems like about 6 or 9 months ago, all of a sudden people are listening, and then they're asking, how do we validate our accounts, ensure they're accurate, because we're going through all these gyrations of going back and forth to ensure we validate who we're paying.
And the ownership of that, right? Like, so some of the biggest examples of fraud that have been perpetuated have been from this not knowing who you're paying, right? Or not validating that I'm entering an account that is owned by the entity that I'm paying. So yeah, it becomes table stakes now. So account validation is definitely one of those things that has come to the forefront. Look, we're always going to have a moving target. Just as we're sitting here talking about what we should be doing as a business and what we should be doing as a technology to support the businesses that we're supporting, there are folks on the fraud side, on the dark side of the web, that are having these same conversations about how they can exploit something, and it's a multi-billion-dollar business for them. All right, so we're constantly going to be at war back and forth with changing issues or changing items that we'll have to continually stay ahead of. But it's things like this. It's things like the user groups that Strategic Treasurer puts together that I think inform the masses in a better way of things to be on the lookout for, and to be identifying how you're going to correct them or address them before they become an issue.
Excellent. All right. That brings us to the third pillar.
Integration reality. So we're moving to reality, right? Like we go back to that slide of the progress that's been made over the last 5 years. And that is such a key element in this whole discussion. If you think about your particular business, how many ERP systems do you have that your business utilizes? It could be from various acquisitions. And as we talked about from an IT resource perspective, each acquisition, the focus is on the efficiencies from a revenue and an expense perspective. Oftentimes, the tools that are being used just get left to be able to continue on as they've always been, right? So over the course of 10, 15 years, a number of those acquisitions turn into 5, 6, 7 different ERP systems that are being utilized by different business units within that ecosystem. So what is going to be important as you think about the impact of different payment rails, as you think about the effects of globalization and cross-border payment functionality, giving your teams the tools to be able to increase the visibility across the entire business means that all of those systems have to talk to each other, or they have to have some type of interpretation layer that brings all of that stuff together at the data set, right? And that's really what we focus on, Craig, is that we focus on trying to create a normalization of that data, so that whatever tools that you put on top of that, or that you're a part of that ecosystem, all have the same data set, kind of speaking the same language. But that visibility can only come when the integration has that type of focus, because otherwise you're going to be missing key elements that would influence that visibility and maybe influence the decisions that you make.
Yeah. So last, and still containing some importance, is that screening leads to lower levels of payments to sanctioned parties. Those are not good for banks. It's not good for corporations. And it leads to meeting the growing standards of good corporate conduct. And we would say, standard of good corporate conduct is what is at least the minimum that an organization should do to protect itself in any area or to perform at a certain level. And in terms of sanctioned parties not making payments, screening for those, this is putting screening into your processes, all of your payment processes, will help meet this escalating standard of good corporate conduct. What was fine and acceptable 20 years ago was terrible 10 years ago, would be fireable offense 5 years ago. So what's changing over time is the expectations of your management and the expectations of what's commercially reasonable or a standard of good conduct is changing. And so for all those who have been embedding this screening, adding filters, adding compliance and validation services, this is most excellent that you're doing that. So thank you so much for spending some time on your day discussing payments, the survey results. Again, for those who took the survey, excellent. For everybody who didn't, next time you get a survey invite, complete the survey. It's worth it. It would be fun. You'll be cooler, and we'll love you for that. Maybe not love you for that, but we'll appreciate it for sure. We appreciate TIS underwriting that. We do have a few more relevant items to cover, and I'll turn it back over to Brian Weeks. So thank you, Johnny. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And be sure to download the Global Payments Survey Report by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.